Today's episode is brought to you by How's It Brewing. Located less than 1 mile from the surf in Honolulu, Hawaii, How's It was founded by true craft beer enthusiasts inspired by island flavors and palates. Melding that with the best of the Pacific Northwest and global styles and traditions, How's It Brewing specializes in high-quality, on-site brewed beers available for both wholesale and retail. So whether you're a bar owner, a serious beer lover, or just hop curious, they've got something for you. Stop by their tasting room and enjoy a wide range of carefully crafted beers, pre-packaged options for the non-beer drinkers in your crew, and a rotating lineup of local food trucks that'll keep your taste buds just as happy as your pint glass. The game's probably on one of their TVs, and you may even run into a local shaper to talk about that new board you've been wanting. That's How's It Brewing, 330 Kamani Street, Honolulu. Good vibes, great beer, and always something new on tap. Tell them Billy Jack sent you. Hello and welcome back to the Surfer's Library, proudly presented by Hillsborough Surf Club. I'm Billy Jack, your guide through the pages of surf history, culture, and legends. Today we continue reading Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel by Michael Lear Hinson and Donna Clausen-Jost. If you'd like to read the book for yourself, it's available on Amazon and endlessdreamspublishing.com. Last episode, we read chapters 4 through 7 that covered events in Michael's life leading up to and during the filming of The Endless Summer. If you haven't already, make sure you go back and check it out. This episode, we pick up in chapter 8 as Michael, Robert, and Bruce are flying back to Hawaii after wrapping up filming. I hope you enjoy. Chapter 8, The End of the Road. Nobody in Hawaii knew we were back from the endless summer. Word hadn't gotten out yet that we'd flown around the world in 3 short months. So when we walked into the terminal at Honolulu Airport, the only person waiting for us was Mike Haley. Haley and I went back a year or so. I used to stop by his older brother Jack's house in Seal Beach to churn out a few boards once in a while. Jack was a true waterman. He won the first U.S. Open of surfing at Huntington Beach in 1959 and was the head lifeguard in Seal Beach for years. Mike won it 2 years later. It was Mike and I who hit it off, though. Haley was a creative genius and a total cruiser. He also loved being the entertainer with his stories. If you needed to keep the party alive, Haley was the guy. I was the dude who walked around with a wild hair up my ass all the time. I don't know how, but I think we complemented each other. We were more like brothers than friends. He'd get stoked about whatever we got into, then come down off the high and be a little moody. I tried to encourage him whenever I could, especially when we were out surfing. Haley was also really into the American Indian culture. He applied their ways to his life whenever he could. For example, it was an insult for a brave to ride up on his enemy and touch him with a stick. This was so much worse than killing him. The same went for surfing. If we weren't local, we didn't just paddle out at any break. We'd outsurf everyone. Haley gave us a lift back to Met's house when we landed in Honolulu. Even though he was one of Bruce's first choices to go on the Endless Summer, Haley thought Bruce should have paid for the plane tickets. No hard feelings, though. When Mike came back after the Endless Summer, he stayed with us to kind of get lost in the whole movie thing, said Mike Haley. I'm a year older than Mike, but he was kind of like my big brother. I remember he was a lowrider type guy. He wasn't really a high school quarterback. He didn't ever brag about anything. Instead, he showed everybody he could do it. Not only was he a master shaper, he could ride, too. He also constantly encouraged me. I'd be catching a wave and look up, and he'd be up above looking out for me. Haley didn't ask many questions leaving the airport. I would have told him anything, but the movie didn't even exist yet. As far as we were concerned, it was just another surf trip. Dick Met's house was in Honolulu near the Outrigger Canoe Club. Haley and his bride Sherry Novak, Miss Surfing Illustrated, moved to Oahu from Seal Beach to work at Hobie's. Dick opened it 2 years before, the same year he bought the Dana Point shop. Dick went way back with Sherry's parents, longer than he'd known Haley, so it figures he'd give them a place to stay. I plopped down on the sofa the minute I walked through Met's door. It was your typical house in Hawaii. Boards propped up against the walls, beer in the fridge, and a gecko on the window. I called my dad to tell him I was still alive and to let him know where he could reach me. Then I passed out. Man, it felt good to be back home. The telephone rang the next morning. I was so out of it I couldn't tell you who handed me the phone. "Hello?" I mumbled from underneath a pillow. "Hi, honey." My mother, Grace, sounded like she was next door, not 3,000 miles away. My mom was a tiny woman. She made me feel like I was 6 feet tall. Hearing from her always cheered me up, but she had a really bad habit of calling before anyone on the planet woke up. "Hi, Mom. How are you doing?" Between hiding from the draft in Bruce's garage and the endless summer trip, I probably hadn't talked to my mother in 4 or 5 months. "I'm good, honey. Where are you?" She was worried. "I'm fine, Mom. Sorry I forgot to tell you I was going out of town. I just got back." Still answering to my mother. I waited a second. "Hey, Mom, it's kind of early. Can I call you back later? I really just wanted to get back to sleep." "But it's the afternoon." "Don't worry, sweetheart. You haven't been asleep for a week." She knew me well. Shit, I slept all day? No way did I miss the morning swell at sunset. That's all I wanted to do when I got back. "The FBI is looking for you. They've been at the house twice in the last few months." She got right to the point. "You'd better call them, sweetheart." She gave me the number twice. "You should really call them." "Okay," I snapped. I didn't need reminding that I was a wanted man. "Sorry, Mom. I needed to get off the phone to think things through." I apologized again, scribbled down the FBI's phone number, and told my mother I'd be home in 2 days. "Why won't those fuckers get off my back?" I screamed after I hung up. They just weren't going to let up. I swear, I didn't move an inch for 20 minutes. I was pissed off and scared, and I didn't know how I was going to shake the fucking draft. I just sat on the couch and didn't say a word. Looking around, I noticed everything was exactly the same as when I passed out the day before. Another gecko streaked across the wall, an onshore breeze blew in through the window, and I was wearing the same shirt and pants I had on when I left Tahiti. I felt like a prisoner in paradise. "Fuck," I shouted. What a re-entry into reality. There's no way I'm going to Vietnam. No fucking way. All I wanted to do was surf the North Shore, then do whatever it took to get away from making a movie. I had a ticket to leave for LA with Bruce and Robert, but I didn't have to go. The endless summer wasn't a vacation for me. I have to admit, this job had the best benefits I ever got, but it was still work, and once I was back in Hawaii, I was busting a nut to get around the island. The call from my mother changed everything. Now, not only did I need a break, I needed a plan. Bruce and Robert did some filming on the North Shore for the movie over the next couple days, then left for home on schedule. I gave up my ticket and cruised over to Sunset with Haley instead. Driving to the North Shore was just what I needed. 45 minutes to forget my problems. Yeah, right. It'd take more than a few minutes to get out of this jam. Weaving in and out of downtown traffic, flying through a couple of crosswalks, dodging tourists, wham, we were out of Honolulu. Cam Highway led us straight to the North Shore. My first encounter with the North Shore was in 1944 when I was 2 years old. Crescent City, California was where it actually started on June 28, 1942. I was born in a trailer park near the Battery Point Lighthouse where my grandpa Wheaton worked and lived. My father, Robert, was a career engineer in the Navy, and we transferred back and forth between California and Oahu twice by the time I was 10. We almost always lived on Schofield Base, except for one spring when we moved to a house right at the break at sunset. This was way before anyone surfed anywhere except maybe Waikiki, Haleiwa, and Makaha. Sunset in the 40s was dangerous. There were warning signs posted everywhere, even in the summer, but we still heard about sailors drowning. The only beach that was guarded was Waikiki. My mother wasn't going to take any chances, so she made sure my brother Richie and I learned how to swim in the ponds that formed on shore before we could walk. Little fish, she called us. Even when I was 7 or 8, Mom was still nervous about letting us play near the water. Before they pulled us out of the drink like wet drowned dogs, we moved back to Schofield. Driving past Schofield and Kolekole Ridge, where kamikaze flew over to bomb Pearl Harbor, we got a whiff of the pineapple fields. Back at the ocean, into Haleiwa, we passed the Shave Ice store. Next stop, the North Shore, Waimea, Cammy's Market, and Sunset. 2 local boys came up to me as soon as we pulled up to Sunset. Even before we got our feet wet, they told me that a couple of FBI agents were flashing photos of draft dodgers. This bullshit had gotten way out of hand. I don't think Haley and I even set our boards down on the sand. We just turned around, strapped them back on his car, and split. We drove all the way back to Honolulu, past Dick's house, and surfed the reef that breaks in front of Diamond Head. Finally safe, I sat way out in the water where there wasn't a soul. no Bruce, no Robert, no fucking FBI. Sitting in a spot so far outside you couldn't tell a human being from a bird, I pulled out my last half of a joint from the trip and the matches I'd wrapped in plastic. I fired it up and Haley and I passed it back and forth, ripping the same wave. After my mother's call and the Sunset Beach scare, I was nervous about showing my face. I went undercover and spent the next week trying to figure out how to keep from getting drafted. I even wrote my options down on paper until I realized I didn't have many. I could plead insanity, but I wasn't nuts, although some people might disagree with that. A lot of my friends thought it was crazier to go to Vietnam and kill innocent people than it was to stay home and resist. You're sane if you don't go. Kind of a catch-22, you know? Then there was the medical loophole. Just my luck. I was healthy as a horse. No insanity, no illness. I had two choices. I could either dodge the draft or pretend I was queer. Now don't get me wrong, I had nothing against queers. If they kept their distance, I didn't care what they did. But it was a known fact. It was the only surefire way to get out of the draft. Chapter 9. A Plane Ticket Home. It took 2 weeks to get the nerve up to go home. I really just wanted to stay put in Hawaii, but I was broke and I knew I was going to have to take care of this whole draft mess sooner or later. On top of that, I had to pay for my own ticket because I didn't fly back with Bruce and Robert. I hadn't worked in 3 months and I didn't have a cent to my name. The only way I was going to scrounge up the airfare was to sell the Endless Summer Model Number 1 board. Unfortunately for me, no one had any concept about the movie when we got back to Hawaii, which meant one thing. I wasn't going to get squat for my board. The first kid that phoned about the ad was on his way over from Schofield. I wanted to spruce it up, make it look decent. It had definitely seen better days. While I hosed it off in the backyard, I thought of all the places we'd been together. If that surfboard could only talk, it would tell stories about traveling over thousands of miles, being transported in every kind of vehicle, plane, truck, Volkswagen, along on the adventure of seeking waves in every major ocean in the world, Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, and touring the west side of Africa, miles from the coast and villages where people had no idea of the nature of surfing. It was completely foreign. Since then, the Endless Summer board has been admired for its structure, the strongest and finest that technology could produce. For my part, the craftsmanship and design was one string to perform in small and large surf, an African break, a high wind swell caused by distant volcanic eruptions, or the groundswell of tornadoes and hurricanes of the world. For the number of waves under its belt, impressive for only 3 months, and its survival rate after mastering the elements, it was still in exceptional condition. Even though one day it might be considered a collectible because of its contribution to surfing, it was now being sold for the price of a plane ticket home. "Hey, thanks, man," the kid said. He didn't have a clue what he was buying. He paid me asking price of $200, loaded it onto his beater car, and drove off into the sunset. Chapter 10. Transferring Out. "Damn it," I shouted, throwing my bags down on the baggage counter in the Honolulu airport. I hated leaving Hawaii, especially knowing I was about to walk into an ambush. As hard as I tried, I couldn't figure out a way out of the draft. My usual nature was just bail, say, "See ya," and split town. But we're talking the U.S. government here. They'd been on my ass for 3 years, and I really didn't want to drag this out any longer than I already had. I was tired of their whole game, so I decided to fly home and face the music. Growing up a Navy brat, you got used to moving back and forth between the islands and the mainland. Every year, you could bet money that a few of my buddies from the neighborhood would get transferred off the base. I remember my parents telling me in 1952 that we were moving back to California. "Go ahead," I said. "I'm not leaving." I never wanted to leave Oahu. I could survive without them. Unfortunately, my parents didn't see it that way, and they forced me to go back with them. The whole thing stunk. Schofield Base was my home. I loved everything about it. Navy life was communal living, rows of box-type houses and kids everywhere. We were just one big family. There was nothing bad about school either. The 4th grade in Hawaii was loose shorts, sandals year-round, and a game we learned from the locals called milk bottle tops. In the 50s, milk came over from the Haleakala Dairy on Maui and was delivered in glass bottles on your doorstep early in the morning while you slept. I never actually saw the milkman. He might not have even existed for all I know. Bottles just appeared and disappeared on and off our porch like magic. What made them so special was that the cardboard caps that sealed the milk were painted with tropical scenes of Tahiti, Hawaii, the Philippines, and other Polynesian islands. To adults, milk bottle tops was all about gambling. To us, it was a lot like marbles where you could earn pocket change. You'd pile them up on top of each other, take turns knocking them over with a shooter, and the ones you flipped you got to keep. My friends and I played long before they became known as Pogs in the 1980s, named after passion orange guava juice, another one of the dairy's big sellers. My parents didn't care about my milk bottle tops. They made me pack for our new home in Pacific Beach and never even considered how hard it was going to be for me to part with my collection. I was the ultimate pack rat, for God's sake, but I didn't have a choice. My parents would not let me take the 4 grocery bags full of my prized possessions on the boat to San Diego. I panicked when my house started slowly filling up with the moving boxes. I swear, every morning there'd be another corner of the living room taken over by cardboard. It looked more like a warehouse than our regulation 2-bedroom base housing unit. As it got closer to moving day, all I could think about day and night was having to chuck my precious bottle tops. I had to come up with a plan real fast. Do you know how long it took to fill up those grocery bags? And there was no end in sight. Every morning, my mother would ask me to bring the milk in before breakfast, and there would be 4 more bottle tops staring me in the face. It was a constant reminder, a cruel joke. Nodding off to sleep at night, I kept the bags close to me and ran my fingers through the bottle tops again and again. Before we boarded the boat, I spread the word around the neighborhood to meet me at noon one day at my parents' carport. My friends didn't know what was going on. Of course, they knew my dad had been handed his transfer papers, no big deal. Like I said, we were all used to it, except for the kid that had to leave. I got up early the next morning to make sure I was prepared when my friends showed up. I wanted everything to go smoothly, no screw-ups. Peeking out from the kitchen window, I saw 12 of my buddies hanging out by the carport right down from my house. Quickly, I threw the heavy door open and bolted out onto the asphalt. Everybody snapped their necks towards me. It was all part of the plan. I wanted to give them a jolt. Without making eye contact, I ran across the parking lot and jumped up on the ladder that leaned against the carport roof. I could feel their eyes on my back. Whenever I thought up one of my harebrained schemes, my friends looked confused, like, what the fuck is Hinson up to now? Climbing the ladder like a cat burglar, I hopped onto the roof and slowly reeled them in. I'd read enough comic books to know how to build suspense. Drag it out, baby, drag it out. I took a deep breath of salty air and soaked up the view one more time. Bending down on one knee, I slowly sunk my hands in wrist deep. Every eye was on me. Then, trying to shake them one more time, I jumped back up and started spraying my friends with fistfuls of milk bottle tops. Watching it from up above, everything happened in slow-mo. At first, my buddies reeled back and closed their eyes like they were about to get hit with something painful. It took them a minute for it to sink in that they were only being pelted with cardboard milk bottle tops. Once they caught on, they started running in circles, laughing and screaming with joy. It was pretty funny. They all had different techniques. Some of my friends stretched out their t-shirts to try and catch as many as they could. Others waited until the bottle tops hit the ground and they ran around like a bunch of sandpipers on the beach looking for sand crabs, and a couple of kids stood completely still and looked up at the sky with their eyes closed. They grinned from ear to ear like they were being struck by candy or, better yet, money. It felt like the bottle top shower went on forever. Every time I'd fire 2 fistfuls, I'd dig back into my worn-out grocery sacks and reload until finally the last bottle top went sailing across the parking lot and landed right in Billy Smith's hands. When it was all over, though, it was over. For weeks, I worried about my milk bottle tops, and this is how it all played out, my last hurrah. I never thought about how good it was going to feel. I just knew I didn't want to see them end up in the trash. This was so much more than I could have ever imagined. In that one instant, I became their hero. Unfortunately, 12 years later, I wasn't leaving a hero when I flew home after the endless summer journey. Nobody cared that I'd been away for 3 months on the ultimate surfing safari. The only legacy I was leaving behind was my endless summer surfboard, and I'd bet money the kid who bought it never imagined that someday it would be worth tens of thousands of dollars. I was simply going home. There weren't any bottle caps where I was going. My friends at Schofield had all grown up and moved on with their lives, and there was only one thing waiting for me when I landed in San Diego: the fucking draft board. Chapter 11. Induction. It felt so weird standing at the top of the stairs at Windansea without my surfboard. Who'd have guessed that the draft board would pick this beach to drag me off to the induction center? I was barely awake that spring morning, coming off a 3-day drinking binge after getting my final notice in the mail. Please, God, just put me out of my misery. Alone, I watched the waves with a splitting headache while I waited for the bus. Locals agree. Windansea is one of the best breaks along the San Diego County coastline, closer to Hawaiian waves than any other beach around. It's definitely not for the novice. It takes time to learn its quirks. The size of the break is a major factor. Windansea's pretty limited. Only about 20 surfers can fit at one time. It's also a reef break, not like other local spots. Windansea is a south swell facing south that shifts around unexpectedly. If you're not used to it, you'll find yourself paddling for a wave that changes direction and breaks in a different spot. Locals have the advantage as far as knowing when a set is coming. They sit up in the parking lot and wait for their horns to start honking. "Bullshit," I yelled out loud when I saw the squeaking bus roll down Nautilus and pull up across the street. Windansea was practically in my backyard. How could I leave? As I dragged my sorry ass on the bus, I grabbed the clipboard that was shoved in my ribs by a smug-looking juggie standing next to the door. I wanted to slap the shit out of him just because of his high and mighty attitude. It wasn't his fault my number was up, though. He probably missed his family back in Nebraska just as much as I was going to miss mine in Pacific Beach. I backed off, and against my better judgment, I walked to the back of the bus and slumped down in an aisle seat, hoping I could get some shut-eye on the long 2-hour trip up to LA. There were a dozen or so other guys on the bus when I climbed on. I overheard them saying that they came all the way from Arizona. Can you believe that? I had nothing in common with these landlubbers. I'm sure they didn't know anything about surfing. I also couldn't figure out if they shaved their heads just for the occasion, or if they always wore crew cuts. And man, were they white. They looked like they hadn't seen a day of sunshine in their entire lives. I had absolutely nothing to say to any of these dudes, so I just kept to myself and looked over the clipboard in my lap. According to the kid at the front of the bus, I was supposed to check off only the items on the form that applied to me. Insanity, medical problems, other. Other, I chuckled. I've got your other. I tried to focus. My friends clued me in ahead of time that this was some serious shit and I better pay attention. If I figured this little piece of paper out, it could keep me from getting drafted. But man, this was way too much information for a guy with a serious hangover. Row after row of diseases were listed on both sides of the form. Heart murmur, the clap, diabetes. Which one was I supposed to check to get off this bus? Was there a magic combination? Shit, you couldn't even cheat with your neighbor. Only the draft board had the right answers. Before I read through the whole list, I already knew there were no long-standing illnesses in my family or incidences that scarred me for life. There was only one option. It was time to play my trump card. It happened a month earlier. I'd only been home from the endless summer a few weeks. Out bar hopping with friends, we sped through Mission Beach in Tom's Pontiac. He and Castor were up front. This was one of the few times I didn't sit shotgun. Wedged in the back seat between two of Tom's large buddies, I actually felt pretty protected. There were definite advantages to being small. Headed for a bar in South Mission Beach, we were all smashed out of our gourds and not thinking about anything except the song turned up full blast on the radio. Laughing my head off, I looked up just in time to see the lamppost heading right for our windshield. When I woke up, both doors on Tom's hot rod were wide open. Tom's white head was slumped over the steering wheel, and Billy and the other two guys were hanging out of the windows unconscious. Miraculously, I was okay. Everything moved and I wasn't in pain. It must have been the alcohol in my system and my bodyguards that kept me from busting up my body, and even though I was shaking and a little dazed, I crawled out of the car on my own free will. My buddies were slightly cut up, not too bad. They started moaning just as a crowd formed around Tom's banged-up Pontiac. That was my cue to mix in with the ambulance chasers. Because of my history, I took every opportunity possible to avoid the police, and I walked home feeling like I had just slammed head-on into a wall. The next morning, I swear I could hardly move. I wanted to just stay in bed all day. I sure wasn't in any shape to paddle out. Laying there, I started thinking that I could turn this accident around if I wanted to. Use it to my advantage. So I forced myself out of bed and hightailed it over to a doctor friend who documented my excruciating back pain. I left his office an hour later with a prescription and my diagnosis in writing to bring to the induction center. The U.S. government bus engine finally turned over. We had been sitting there for 15 long minutes to see if anyone else was going to show up. I already guessed that the bus driver wasn't there to check out the waves. Turned out I was the only one who got on at Wind and Sea that morning. Talk about wasting the taxpayers' money. Just as we were about to pull out from the curb, one of the older locals walked up the stairs with his surfboard. "Hey bro, do you have any advice for a guy who doesn't want to go to Vietnam?" I yelled at him, thinking maybe the old-timer could help out a fellow surfer who was about to be drafted. Looking up at the dirty window of the beat-up induction bus, the guy figured out real quick what was going on. I mean, come on, I was the only local sitting in a vehicle marked U.S. Army. "Make sure all your medical questions are marked negative," he told me as the bus was starting to take off. His voice faded. "That'll get you an interview with the psych so you can convince him you're not war material. It's a last-ditch effort, but worth a shot." Chapter 12. Wind and Sea Surf Club. The bus squeaked all the way up Nautilus and onto PCH. The last thing that crossed my mind before I dozed off for a nap was what a long-ass bus ride this would be if we had to keep picking people up all the way to LA. The only road near the coast in the early 60s was PCH. There were no jammed freeways, just a 2-lane road heading north to Oregon and south to the Mexican border. I know because I regularly cruised the highway to check out the surf and get into everyone's camp. Bob Cooper, Terry Tubesteak Tracy, and I called ourselves the Coastal Scouts of Southern California. Bob, who was from Rincon, was the ultimate beatnik. He looked a little too much like Jesus Christ, if you asked me. Sporting a long beard, supposedly to stay out of the military, you never knew what he was going to be wearing. Tubesteak, on the other hand, wore a leather jacket and lived in a shack on the beach in Malibu. This huge ho-daddy was the inspiration for the Kahuna character in the Gidget movie. He was also the guy who actually gave her a nickname. Too bad he didn't have it trademarked. The three of us were on the same wavelength as far as surfing was concerned, so whenever we ran into each other crossing the road, we'd gang up and communicate the swell. Meeting up saved us a lot of time and driving, but we still probably covered more miles a week than Pan Am. Maybe not, but it sounds impressive. On one of my trips up north, the Coastal Scouts told me the Malibu Surfing Association was going to have a contest before they dredged up the beach for the new yacht harbor. The contest was for clubs only, and the top 10 riders from each club would compete in 4-man heats. In those days, there were only a handful of recognized surf clubs: Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara, Malibu, Long Beach, and Hermosa up north, and Swami's Surf Society in San Diego County. A story ran in Surfer magazine announcing that Malibu was offering spots in the lineup for $100 each. In the early 60s, I was a rebel, no affiliations at all. There really wasn't a reason to belong to a club. Castor and Skip Fry felt the same. We were just a bunch of renegade surf kids. Skip and I met in high school. He was a year older than me. I was the guy who rubbed people the wrong way, and also the one who searched out the bigwigs in the surf industry. I'd find them, meet them, and get to be their buddy. Skip was just the opposite, kind of shy. He was more comfortable standing in the background and just observing. For some reason, Skip and I gravitated towards each other. Mike was always searching things out, especially prominent people in the sport, says Skip. Aside from the attention I personally gained from surfing, the exposure I got from hanging out with Mike definitely had a lot to do with my growth. I give him credit for bringing me out of my shell. For a stretch, Skip and I surfed up and down the coast on 2 9-foot pointed tail pigs with 2-inch balsa stringers in the middle on either side and top to bottom, with laminated wood fins. Out of respect for Dewey Weber and Phil Edwards, we wore a cut-off Levi trunks I had made with Dewey's colors, white, yellow, and brown, and a patch on the front leg that read P.O.P.E., protege of Phil Edwards. Our boards also had colored stripes to match our shorts, a big Weber logo across the 23-inch deck, and 25 2-inch logos from the tip to the tail. Now, because of the first Malibu Challenge, there was a reason to be part of a club, so I started asking around. Long Beach was definitely out. Those snobs made me fucking manic, plus there were all kinds of restrictions to join. The only club that I ever really considered was Swami's below the SRF church in Encinitas. For years, Swami's had been a favorite spot. It can stay glassy almost all day and breaks best on a northwesterly swell. It also peaks up outside in the kelp beds and forms a right hook that walls up to an inside reef. Depending on the tide and swell size, the wave can be ridden all the way to an inside shore break because of the kelp beds. One problem with joining Swamis was that all their members lived in North County, from Del Mar to Carlsbad. I was from Pacific Beach and didn't really fit in. Plus, I had a Mexican girlfriend and drove a lowered, primer-spotted 1956 Oldsmobile with a slogan painted on the back fender that read, "Kinda casual." I wasn't exactly the image they were looking for. I was shaping for Hobie up in Dana Point when he opened a shop on Grand in Pacific Beach. He hired Chuck Hazley to manage things, and I had a shaping room built in the back for custom orders. Chuck was 10 years older than me, kind of an older brother type. He'd been a teacher and was a member of the old school of surfing. He definitely had it together. One day, Castor, Skip, and I ganged up on Chuck and asked him if he had any ideas about getting into the Malibu Surf Challenge. First thing we needed, he said, was to become legitimate, part of an organization with bylaws and memberships. So we made some calls about a club he remembered from back in the 40s and early 50s in La Jolla called the Wind and Sea Surf Riders, who teamed up with the crew from the San Onofre Surf Club. He found out that they were technically still a club, but because they hadn't really been together for years, they gave us permission to use their status and their name. We started game planning and went to Hobie. "If we can come up with a club, will you sponsor us?" "You're on," he said, no questions asked. Hobie offered to lease a bus and a driver to take us to Malibu if we got it together in time for the contest. After voting in a board, Chuck as president, I was VP, and Castor was secretary, we started recruiting everyone we knew who surfed. Man, it was rapid fire. Everybody we asked, nobody even hesitated. We swore them in right on the spot. Over beer and in between pool shots at the Glad Hand Bar on Girard in La Jolla, Chuck announced the bus ride to the Malibu Challenge to the crew. "It's official. The Wind and Sea Surf Club is looking for members to surf in our first contest up in Malibu. Basically, anyone who goes is in the club." Everyone knew San Diego beaches were loaded with juice and that our surfers were the best of the best. Everybody except the surf clubs up north, that is. They had such big egos, especially Long Beach. In their minds, nobody came close to their level. This was just the secret weapon we would need for our first competition. Can you spell ambush? Within minutes, we signed up Bobby, Raymond, and Ronald Patterson, Wayne Land, and Al Nelson. Then early the next morning, I picked off Diff, Tiny Brain, Snowman, and Butch Van Artsdalen, who worked at the Hobie factory in Dana Point. Butch spread the word up in Orange County, and Joey Cabell, Mickey Minoz, and Dave Willingham jumped on the bandwagon. 48 hours later, we recruited 30 members, including artist Butch Cornelius, who came up with the Wind and Sea logo, and thanks to Hobie, we got a verbal okay to enter the contest as the newest surf club in San Diego County. Chuck wanted to get a head start for Malibu, be set up on the beach before our competition showed their faces, really throw them off balance. So a few of us caught the charter, Paul's Bus Lines at Wind and Sea the night before the contest. We took off around midnight to pick up the rest along the way. The keg was loaded in at Maynard's, a grubby beer-drinking bar down the street from Crystal Pier where we ate the best Wednesday night spaghetti special 25 cents could buy. Butch Van Artsdalen got on at the Glad Hand. Boy, was that guy smooth with the ladies. When we pulled up, he already had a buzz going, normal for Butch, and a woman on each arm. Crossing city limits, the keg was tapped and beer was shoved at you as soon as you boarded. Talk about crazy. Once we got on the road, it was chaotic as hell. Butch would yell up to the balding, nervous driver to pull over. We'd pile out, then we'd all cram into a phone booth. "Hey, Snowman," Butch yelled. "Pack it up, man. We're coming to get you." Even though everyone knew they were being picked up, Butch wanted to call ahead anyway. The driver tried to follow Butch's directions, but all the detours finally got to him. "That's it. You guys are a bunch of assholes." The scrawny driver blew a fuse just north of La Jolla. I swear I thought he was going to have a heart attack. "They don't pay me enough money to put up with this shit." You could see steam coming out of his ears. Swerving onto the shoulder of the road, he slammed on the brakes and jolted to a stop. I've never seen so many bodies flying around inside a vehicle. Lurching forward, everyone grabbed onto whatever was bolted down, spilling beer, wine, rum, and cokes. Butch regrouped first. Man, was he pissed. He jumped to his feet, pushed his way up the aisle to the front of the bus, knocking over anybody who got in his way. "You're not going anywhere," he screamed. Everybody went nuts. You'd think Butch scored a last-minute touchdown in a football game or something, and the driver, well, he must have forgotten for a minute how puny he really was, because when he stood up to challenge him, Butch put his hand on the guy's shoulder and pushed him back down in his seat. He leaned over and calmly told the driver, "You need to fucking sit down and keep driving." When he started to fight back, Butch flipped out. "Fucking sit down, now!" I think Skip was a little spooked about getting on a bus with a bunch of drunken surfers, probably because he fell asleep at the wheel a few years before on his way home from a party and ended up in the hospital with a fractured knee and jaw. He and LJ Richards played it safe and rode in one of the cars that carried our gear. Basically, the new Wind and Sea Surf Club partied all the way up to Malibu. Del Cannon, Harold Iggy, Rusty Miller, Lauren Swan, John Petit. We drank, smoked, hung out the windows with the music playing full blast. Put 30 of the best surfers together on a bus headed for their first contest, and it can't help but get rowdy. Our hostage pulled up to Malibu at 5:30 a.m. After his run-in with Butch, he didn't make another peep. The door swung open, Butch poured out and fell flat on his face onto PCH, and the rest of us landed on top of him carrying whatever we guzzled on the trip up. High tide was on its way out, and 1 to 2 foot ankle slappers lapped on the beach while we set up camp. The southerly swell that usually prevails that time of year wasn't showing itself. In fact, the conditions were so bad the organizers considered canceling the event. I know for a fact that the Malibu Club promoters weren't very stoked when we dragged our sorry asses onto the sand. All the other clubs looked eager to get out there. Most of our guys were passed out, facing the sand messes. Chuck's plan kind of backfired. The Wind and Sea Surf Club looked completely useless. With the tide going out and returning in mid-afternoon and a predicted swell coming in, the contest got underway. Heat 1 was called. Everyone looked pretty crisp on the average size breaks except for us. We weren't exactly threatening. Long Beach basically left us in the dust. I don't even know how we advanced. Later on that morning, when the fog cleared out of our heads, we realized we'd better rally together or we'd be heading home with our tails between our legs. We had to turn this contest around and show the established clubs we were serious contenders. That's when we pulled out our big guns, Joey, Butch, Bobby, Raymond, Iggy, Skip, and me. Once our artillery was exposed, they didn't know what they were up against. Come down to the finish when we ended up with 5 guys out of the 6 in the final heat. Joey, a cunning artist of the sport, was the master at cutting the lines of the fast lane. You could always count on him to be in the hunt. Joey had no fear. He wove around Bobby the Flea Patterson doing his usual little dance, and by the end of the day, both Joey and Bobby ripped their socks off and took home first and second place. Billy Castor also took first in the paddling division. Chief Lifeguard Morehouse from Huntington Beach tried to disqualify and formally reprimand us, though, for poor sportsmanship when we dogpiled Castors, screaming how the other teams sucked. But in the end, the Wind and Sea Surf Club left Malibu as champions. We were going to win, even if we had to steal the trophies away from those fuckers. After it was over, I hitched a ride home with LJ and Skip, so I don't really know who actually drove the bus back. I do know that the driver split earlier that morning, and as we drove away, our charter was still sitting where he left it on Highway 101. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and that you'll join us again next week as we continue reading from Mike Hinson, Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel. Until then, keep your toes on the nose, your bottom turns tight, and your stoke high. I'll see you in the lineup.